Hey, Karen.
Hi.
Hola, hola. Buenas tardes.
Hola.
Good morning, good evening. Do you want to hear me okay? Do you want to check your microphone, Sophia and Karen?
Sure.
Awesome. How's everything?
Very good, very good.
All right. Let me do a quick check. We're having people. I'm going to turn on the music for a little bit more. Let's give them 3 more minutes. 11:05, yeah?
Yes.
Hi, Tim. Welcome. We'll be starting at 11:05. We're giving people a couple minutes. Bueno, good morning, Karen and Sophia. It's 11:05.
Good morning.
This is your show, so you guys let me know if you feel we can start, or should we give people a couple more minutes?
What do you think, Karen?
Let's start.
Okay, let's do it.
We were born ready.
That's right.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Angela.
Welcome.
I am a co-founder of Seriously Creative, and we've been invited by Evertech and Piloto to help host this event in a different platform, which is what we've been using for a while for type of event experiences, which is called Hop-In. It's a little different from what you're used to. It's you don't have to hop unless you are invited to do so, or you decide to participate, which we do actually invite you to do so for the Q&A for right now. I'm going to do a couple of quick technical demos for you or to let you know how this thing works, because it's a little bit different. Right now, we're in, what Karen, Sophia, and I are doing the video conference part of this platform. However, you're more debate on the chat. So I'd love to make sure that you know how to use the chat by, doing a quick hello or something on the chat. And just let me know that you're here. And because this is important, this is how you're going to be asking questions or interacting during the session. And we'd love for you during Tim's talk to go ahead and leave us your insights, ideas, or anything that comes up during the session. So use the chat. Love it. Doing great. Said that, with hopping, you decide what you want to look at most. Okay, so where your focus is. So there's different screens for the video conference, and you can go ahead and double click on whichever one of the screens you want to see bigger. So it's just going to go ahead and amplify that one part of the screen. Also, another quick tip is that if you see on top of the word chat on the top right hand of the screen where it says right now, if you hit little arrow there, what it will do is that it will expand your screen and get rid of the chat. So just make sure if you want to see it even bigger or stretch across the screen, you can go ahead and click on that button. Again, if you want to use the chat, and we encourage you to do so during the talk, just go ahead and do so. We want to, feel you and know what's going on with you and the highlights of the session, as well as we'll be monitoring that chat for Q&A. What else do I have to say? We'll be doing this in Spanish and English, I guess. But for me, it's more of a pleasure to be here co-hosting this event. Thank you very much, Evertech and Piloto 151 for putting this together. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Sophia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Stolberg. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Piloto 151. We're the first and largest co-working space in Puerto Rico. So welcome, everyone. We're very excited about Tech Guru Talks. Tech Guru Talks is an experiment that we co-launched with Evertech this year. And the idea behind it was really to bring together the developer community here in Puerto Rico, bring world-class speakers that could not only speak about tech, but could also get a little more technical than the other events that we have in the community. And so with this experiment, we've already had 4 other Tech Guru Talks in this series. They've spanned everything from data visualization to cyber and so many other cool things. And we invite you to our YouTube channel to check them out if you missed them. So we're very excited about this partnership that we have with Evertech, and you will be seeing more Tech Guru Talks in the future. And today we're super excited to have our 5th Tech Guru Talk. So with that, I will leave you with Karen, who will talk to you a little bit more about why Evertech decided to join in. And yes, Karen, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Karen Serra. I am an innovation specialist here at Evertech. As Sophia and Angie said, we're super excited to be bringing you guys, getting more connected with the developer community out there and bringing you world-class speakers. This is definitely an experiment which we've liked very much being a part of, to learn a little bit more about what's out there and getting out of the zone, especially with this world situation we are living. A little bit about Tim. I will move forward to presenting our speaker today. He helps organizations find harmony between the want to do good by their community and the need to build a sustainable business. Figures out authentic ways to turn investments in human relationships into meaningful positive results for the business and the people it impacts. This is definitely super important, not only to give back to our communities, but as Tim says in his bio says, learn how to be sustainable while doing it. And without further ado, I'll leave it to Tim.
Welcome, Tim.
Welcome,
Hello.
Tim.
Thank you very much.
Can you hear us okay? Everything's good? Love the lighting.
You? Thank you. It's better than our tech check this morning, isn't it? The sun came up.
If you want, you can go ahead and start screen sharing while I go ahead and finalize some of the, the tech announcements for people to navigate this whole hop-in thing. So thank you so much, Karen, and thank you so much, Sophia. For right now, we're going to magically leave the screen little so that we leave Tim to what he's going to do. Again, announcement for everyone, chat, please use the chat, use it very much. We want to know that, what's being captured by you, all your insights, ideas, or questions. Please do make sure that you have two options on the chat. Make sure you're on the for this part. Again, for those who are coming in a little bit later, if you double click on the video screen that you would like to see bigger, it will go ahead and amplify that for you. You want to see it even bigger. What you do is where the 17 with a little green light is on the top of the screen, just go ahead and click on that arrow and it will expand the screen for you and get rid of the chat. Do go ahead and close it again if you want to participate, because we want to make sure that we monitor the questions that you have on the chats to help for the Q&A. Tim has a presentation, but after that there will be a group discussion. And I think with that we're all good. Tim? You're good?
Awesome. Yeah, good. Thank you for that intro and setting us all up. And I think I'm going to just start by expressing my gratitude for this opportunity to be here. I was really excited when I heard from Sophia and had the invitation to come join this. It's been a while since I've visited Puerto Rico in person, so it's great to be dialing in. As we've heard from Karen earlier, that we're talking about strengthening developer communities today. And, Sophia was talking about getting technical and offering a more technical level of insight into whatever topic is covered in these Tech Guru talks. And I think communities are a unique topic to speak of in the context of developers and getting technical, because the technicality of it all is really at the human level and at the people level. So I'm eager to share that with you today and spark a discussion, and really would love to hear folks' ideas and questions and have a rich conversation afterwards. So what's our next 20 minutes or so look like? Do some introductions so you know who I am, and get a little bit of insight into who you are. This is where the chat will come in handy, because I'll ask a few questions, and if you guys can answer through the chat, either with ones and zeros or emoji reactions, when we get to the introduction section, that'll be handy. After we introduce ourselves, I'll just frame the conversation a little more specifically, the what and the why. The why is very important. And then we'll jump into some exploration of different community examples and identifying sources of strength in those existing communities. And from those examples, we're going to pull out the keys to strengthening communities, and then put those into action, talk about how we can put those into action to build stronger communities. And then we'll have our discussion. So I'll start, since I have the mic, and introduce myself. I'm calling in right now from Taos, New Mexico. Very grateful to be on this land that we've borrowed from the Taos Pueblo and Native Americans, Indigenous North Americans. And I've recently relocated here from California. In my years of community building, I've traveled all over the world, and my profession of community building is the reason why I became familiar with Puerto Rico and got to visit there and have spent a lot of time there. So the experience that I've been accumulating for the last 10 years or so that kind of I'm bringing to this talk has been working in startups mostly, from the ground level of startups where there is 3 employees, 3 founders, up into exits, successful exits and not so successful exits. And all of those startups have been focused on software and APIs and infrastructure and delivering that software to its customers, those customers being developers. Since 2010, I've been devising strategies as an employee, as a team leader, as a consultant, as an advisor, mentor, board member to various software companies on how to build relationships with developers, how to build strong communities around their products and their companies in order to be successful and drive towards their goals. So I'm currently, with that as a backdrop, I'm currently in a transitionary phase where I'm really focusing more of my efforts on building community for climate change, or better than for climate change, but to address the crisis of climate change. But still very much involved in the developer community and happy to be here talking about this. And we'll definitely work in some of my more recent experience in climate communities into the talk as well. So enough about me. Sorry, I put this up a little late, but I'll put it up at the end as well in case you want to get in touch. My email or my social handle on all the different channels. And now the more interesting thing to you, get to know you a little bit. So get your typing hands ready for the chat if you want to participate. And I have some questions to gauge who everyone is in the audience. So first one is either use thumbs up or thumbs down emoji, or you can use a 0 for no and a 1 for yes. So first question is, have we met before? Have I met you when I was in Puerto Rico or somewhere else? 0 for no, or 1 for yes, or thumbs up, thumbs down. Always like to see new familiar faces, but it's great to meet new people too. Awesome, looks like we have a little bit of both. And are you currently on the island of Puerto Rico? Just a second. Let's put 1 for yes and 0 if you're somewhere else, or thumbs down if you're somewhere else. All right, so we have some people in both places, both on the island and not. How about on a scale from 1 to 5, how excited are you about this topic of community that we're discussing today? 1 being kind of excited, 5 being super, super duper excited. All right, we've got 6s coming in. Awesome. And finally, do you consider yourself a developer? I'm guessing Abner does because he put 3.765. Yes or no? 1 for yes, I am a developer. 0 for no. Okay. And final question. Do you consider yourself a member of a community or multiple communities today? Yes is 1 and no is 0. Okay. Looks like we have a bunch of community members in the crowd. That's perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you for participating in that. That gave me a better idea of who's part of this discussion, and I look forward to learning more from you in the Q&A part. But for now, we'll move on. So let's frame this discussion a little more specifically around the what and the why. The what part of this discussion is, well, we're exploring these examples of existing communities, right? So we'll really look at 3 different examples. We'll identify how do we know they're successful, they're strong communities, and then we'll dig into what do we think makes them strong communities. That brings us to the sources of strength. And then once we've distilled that, we'll apply those sources of strength and how they can fit into strengthening our communities, those that we are members of, we're leaders of, so on and so forth. So there's a meta what to this conversation, because we're talking about strengthening communities, and I want to make sure that we're all on a even playing field, or starting from the same point. And what does strength mean? Just simply the act of honing in on this definition can lend itself to our ability to eventually strengthen our communities and ourselves. If we know what strength means, we can achieve it more likely. So here's a little word cloud that I created with the words that I think are important when defining strength. Strength in a community is healthy, it's balanced. There's positive energy within it, there's love within it. People support one another, there's great thought that goes into it. It's an uplifting experience to be a part of it. There's positive impact that comes from its existence. It's a non-violent place. It's a non-toxic environment. Practices of compassion and loving kindness are commonplace. It's diverse. All of these things really characterize strong communities. And just as much as it's important to recognize what is strong, it's also important to recognize what's not strong. What's not strong, in my opinion, is engagement. Now, we often hear engagement used when we evaluate communities, and I'm not saying that a community with engagement isn't strong. I'm saying engagement within a community in and of itself and by itself doesn't guarantee strength. And we can look at examples where communities have incredible engagement amongst their members, but instead of all these words that kind of make us feel good, we see things like imbalanced or unhealthy or non-empathetic or negative or a lack of love. And while people might really, really engage there, without all those things, other words like violent and toxic, without the non in front of them, start to creep in. And just one more point on this, when we think about community, just like when we think about technology, when we invent a technology, typically we're inventing it to do good, to have a positive impact on the world. But every inventor of technology has probably found out at some point that regardless of their intentions to do good with that technology, when it's out there and it's in the hands of anyone who wants to use it, that technology can be used for things other than good. And I point that out because, in a sense, community is a technology. And communities can grow around really unhealthy things, and they can gain engagement and they can gain power. Now, I wouldn't call those strong communities, I'd call them weak, but they're important for us to be aware of on the flip side. So that's the what, both what we're talking about and what is strength. And now my favorite part, the why. I have a fly flying around my head. Sorry if that distracts you. I feel like President Pence or Vice President Pence. Sorry to say that word. Might be triggering. So why is this important? Well, strong communities are important because many reasons, but I'll highlight three. For one, they support our businesses and our organizations. The people and the relationships within the businesses, make up the community, the partners, the investors, the employees, the customers, and all of those people together when working in community can make businesses succeed. So since we spend so much of our time building businesses and trying to make a living through them, it's important to understand how community can play into their success. Second, beyond these businesses at the individual level, communities support us as people, as individuals, along our paths from birth to death. We can't get by without community. And in the absence of community, we find ourselves alone. And then sometimes, being alone and finding some peaceful solitude can be great when we choose it. But when aloneness, solitude is not chosen and is thrust upon us, it can be very distressing and even deadly. Which leads me to my third point of why community is important. Community helps us survive. It's literally a lifeline. We depend on it in times of crisis. When a natural disaster strikes, for example, before the government services can get to us, or if and when the government services don't get to us, our communities are where we find support and how we get by. And without this, from the time of infancy to our elder days, it'd be a lot tougher to survive. One note on this, since to bring it kind of to current times in a moment of a pandemic, as I've navigated this personally, I've listened to a lot of teachers, and what I've learned from some of those teachers, particularly the monks and the meditators, is a reminder to some of the lessons I've learned in studying Buddhism, which is there's a Sanskrit word often used in Buddhism called Sangha, and Sangha is equivalent of community. And as these wise people have sat and talked to other people who are listening about how can we navigate this global pandemic, one of the key things I've heard teachers come back to is Sangha, community. This is what will get us through this. And certainly I've seen that play out in my life. So that's the why, so we can get by. Okay, now that we have framed our conversation, I want to jump into some of these examples and really explore. So the first example I want to look at is a company called Twilio. This is its stock ticker, TWLO. I put send there too because I'm drawing from my experience with both of these companies. Send represents SendGrid, and Twilio, they are now one company, but once upon a time they were two. And this example is important because around 2010, when I jumped into my career in technology, these two companies had just started, and they've made it into my community examples because that's what they invested in their early days as they were, just getting started and bringing on their first customers. They really leaned into community as a business strategy, and it paid off. To spoil the story, and some of the important aspects of their utilization or their implementation of community was that they focused on developers. Developers were their customers. The founders were developers. That's why the companies were founded in the first place, because as developers, they experienced a pain, a problem, and they wanted to solve it for themselves and others. And so they built a community that was really centered around this identity of a developer, and they focused on giving the developers a voice and celebrating them and putting them at the center of their product design, their messaging, their branding, all the experiences they created out in the field. And this was different. This was a departure from past software companies like Microsoft and Apple, who had technology evangelists who mostly focused on the people who were buying software, not necessarily the people using the software. So by shifting that focus to the people using the software, the developers, and really leaning into a celebration of that identity, they were able to foster extremely, extremely strong community. Another part of what they did here was they leaned into another community, which was the startup community. So they started to overlap their community involvement and the communities that they helped build, which is going to come into play in a few minutes later in our talk. So the next, one more thing on this. How do we know this was successful? So I've described a lot of the elements of how they, what went into and how they approached this community building. How do we know that it was actually successful for them? Well, both companies in their first 5 years had exponential growth in customers, revenue, employees, international presence, brand awareness, and within 7 years, each of them had gone public. And within 2 more years after that, Twilio had acquired SendGrid for $3 billion. So I think by all measures, financially speaking, it was a success. But again, back to like my view of the technical side of this, what really exhibited success and strength was the relationships that were formed and the second order effects of all the people who were involved in that, who went on to start more companies and create a lot of economic stimulus in their local geographic communities. So that's example one. Example two is called The Road. This is actually a community that I learned about that existed in Nova Scotia, Canada. And so a much different example, and wanted to bring in a diverse set of examples to look at. And what happened in The Road was it was very dysfunctional. There were about 120 residents of the town. It was poverty stricken, very shabby, very little resources, lots of mental health issues, very socially isolated. The town itself, people didn't really get along or interact very much. And then with other towns around it, they were just viewed as kind of a place you didn't want to go and people you didn't want to interact with. So this person named Leighton, who was a researcher, observed this and worked with the local government to build a little community and get them involved in these people's lives, and gave them some resources and some skills, education to cooperate a little bit better and communicate with one another. And then they presented them with a common challenge, or an opportunity, I should say, to accomplish a common goal. And with that opportunity in place and a few more skills, social skills in their tool belts, they were able to work together and cooperate and fall into different roles and find leaders amongst themselves and establish a goal and then work towards it through cooperation. And that goal that they wanted to accomplish together was to put electricity in the schoolhouse so that they could show films. So with different people coming together, Leighton and his research team, the government, the educators, and the people, all kind of merging together with their own wants and needs and supporting one another. After months, they got the electricity, they were able to show films, and after more months and even years, you couldn't tell the town from what it used to be. People were much healthier, much less mental illness. The town looked nicer, and the surrounding towns started intermingling. So yet another success in that they accomplished their goals and their quality of life improved drastically. And our last example is one from a current experience. It's called Climate Change Makers. And this is a community that formed out of the problem of climate change and the recognition that we have one way that we can address climate change is through government and policy. And we have policymakers who we elect. So the solution to the problem of climate change that Climate Change Makers as a community has decided to take on is to support climate candidates, those politicians who are running for office, who believe in climate change and are committed to doing something about it. Our mission as a community is to get those people elected. And some of the really important aspects of this are that there's a sense of urgency and that there's a November election. So when this community started a few months ago, there was a tight time frame, and we had to accomplish our goals in that time frame. And there's a lot of care. The people in this community really care about the cause and are very passionate about it. And another element of this that I want to pull out is that the purpose of solving or avoiding catastrophe of climate change is really, really meaningful. And the consequence of being successful or not is immense. So how do we know this has been successful? Well, in a matter of 4 months, we've grown from 0 people to 500 people in the community, and it's going to take some more time, and we'll see how successful we were after November 3rd. But another great example of how a community can come together really quickly and be strong right out of the gates. So those are the examples. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into the sources of strength and what we see across those 3 examples. I know I didn't share all the details of all of them, but I'll guide us in kind of pulling out 3 things that are consistent across all 3 examples and other examples that we can apply to our lives. So the first thing is that there are shared goals and a common purpose. And this is probably pretty obvious, not a huge groundbreaking discovery that shared goals and common purpose are a part of strong communities. But what's more interesting is the details below that. So let me dig a little bit deeper so that we can find some meaning and some helpfulness here. When we talk about purpose, all purpose is not created equal. And so I've created this little 4-quadrant diagram to differentiate and categorize our purposes and different causes that a community can be organized around. And the 2 different measurements that I want us to focus on are meaning or consequence, which is represented on the horizontal axis, and the other is passion. How much passion do the members have, and how much do they care about it? So from left to right, on the horizontal axis, on the right is more meaning and greater consequence, and on the left is less. And then up and down vertically, at the top is more passion and more care from the members, and at the bottom is less. And, I don't assign good or bad to communities that fall anywhere within any of these quadrants. It's not about necessarily judging them, it's about understanding them and being aware where your community falls on this scale. So that's one detail I wanted to bring out of the common purpose. And the second one is this idea of co-community. So when we have a common purpose within our community, we can also start to see other communities outside of ours that also share that purpose. And it's important to be aware of those so that we can collaborate with other communities. Because when our community who has a shared and common purpose sees another one who's aligned with that, maybe not the exact same, but very much in the same theme, we can work with them. And when we do, we find overlap with them. And if we do that again with another community, we'll find more overlap and even more overlap. And it keeps on going as these circles of community combine and cooperate and do co-communitying, as I like to say. And ultimately, that leads to the seed of life, which is an element of sacred geometry. And if we continue expanding that throughout the life of the community, that seed of life will flourish and flower into the flower of life. So those are the 2 levels of detail I want us to think about, deeper than just common goals and shared goals and common purpose. But what is the nature of our purpose? And who are the other ones? Who are the other communities who we can cooperate with? And sacred geometry is really is a visual representation of nature's perfection. And I think, that's kind of what we achieve and what we feel when a community is really strong and inspiring on all cylinders. So the second source of strength beyond shared goals and common purpose is consistency, persistence, and commitment. And I know there's not just one. I just kind of wanted to group these 3 things together because they're very complementary and kind of feed off of one another and support one another. So with consistency, when members of a community are consistently active and participative, That means like over the course of the week, we see people showing up on a consistent basis, and then they're persistent. So over time, that consistency continues for a long period of time because it takes time to build communities. And then we really, through that consistency and that persistence, we really show and demonstrate our commitment to the purpose, to the cause, and to the community itself. Now, one warning on this one is that when persistence and consistency fades away, your community can fade away very, very quickly. And I point this out as kind of a balance to, like, we talk a lot about what makes strong communities, but we also have to keep returning to what are the risks, what are the threats to weakening our communities or to hindering the strength of our communities. So remember, as consistent and persistent as you are, as soon as you start to let off of that, the strength can fade. So finally, our last source of strength is in both individuals and in leadership. And I didn't say leaders intentionally. I said leadership because leadership comes in different forms from different people. And to speak a little more specifically to this, every individual is important. Every role within the community is equally important. Some people might consider themselves or be named leaders, and some others might not. But someone who is named a leader or considers themselves a leader is not more important than one who doesn't. And that's a very important thing for the leaders to accept and for everyone else to accept as well. Some of the things that individuals can do to contribute to leadership are support those other individuals, either step into leadership roles, or if that's not comfortable to you, support others who are willing and eager to step into those roles. Some of the components of leadership from wherever it comes from, whether it comes from the group or comes from individuals, are creating radical transparency and unwavering honesty. Things that create supportive environment, so like clear paths toward taking on more responsibility as individuals and stepping into new roles, and acknowledging one another's roles and responsibilities and accomplishments and celebrating one another, and just being genuine and loving and nurturing. And so that's kind of like how leadership emerges from the group. And I want to say one thing about leaders as individuals, which is what I think is most important to look for in strong leaders is a flourishing of other leaders. So a not so strong leader might just remain the leader forever and not have any other leaders emerge around them. But the greatest leaders are going to be the circle that extends into more circles and creates that flower of life of more leaders. So if leaders aren't emerging around another one, something might not be right. So here we get to our conclusion. Ultimately, the strength of communities is a reflection of the strength of its individuals. So if that's true, If the strength of communities is a reflection of the strength of its individuals, what is the key to strengthening our communities? Well, some simple math says that if we strengthen our individuals, if we have stronger individuals, we will have stronger communities. So that's it. Let's make ourselves stronger individuals so that we can be the best members of our communities as possible. And that's where we get to applying our learning. And I've decided to kind of really distill this down to the individual level because it's more manageable. Because this is within our personal agency, ourselves. Whereas controlling others and controlling a big mass of people is really difficult and daunting. So let's focus on how we can strengthen ourselves. The first way we do this is a very baseline starting point, which is self-care and self-love. And this is going to sound really, really fundamental and maybe obvious to some, but I think it's important. And I think that if we're honest with ourselves, and if I'm honest with myself, I don't do this very well all the time. And I could definitely do it better. So what is self-care and what is self-love? It's mental health, it's physical health, it's spiritual health, it's emotional health, it's psychological health. And how do we build that health? Well, we think about our diet. Of course, what we ingest into our bodies, like food and drink, especially water. We don't hydrate well, typically. But also the other aspect of our diet, the news that we consume, the information that we consume, the social media that we bring into our minds. It's a diet of emotions, and we can control it. In addition to diet, there's fitness and exercise. And again, this is both physical and mental. So in the physical side, move, achieve movement every single day. And on the mental side, meditate, therapy, movement also can be meditation. Yoga is a moving meditation. Endurance sports are often moving meditations for people. And as a side note, there are communities for this. So if you're needing support in caring for yourself and showing yourself love, there are communities for that. So if we're taking care of ourselves at the baseline, then we're going to be able to spend some energy on personal inquiry and introspection. And this is really important because we got to know ourselves to really focus our energy in the right places and to ensure that we are being our best selves in our communities. We have to know our best selves. So the self-inquiry needs to be questions like, what is my purpose? The big picture thing. And maybe you don't know that yet, but what are my purposes? What are some things that I really care about and why? And of those things, like, how much do I care about that thing? And what would be the consequence of if I let that just happen the way it is going to happen versus if I got involved and I influenced as a member of a community, that thing. And finally, with a better understanding of ourselves and a solid foundation of health in ourselves, then we can really set ourselves on a path of evolution and allow ourselves to change over time and allow ourselves to let go of maybe some of the communities that we don't care about so much or the causes that aren't so meaningful to us, and replace those things with the purpose that is calling us and the causes that we care so much about that we can't stop thinking about them. So if we're doing all that work on ourselves, how does that translate, and how do we channel that into the communities that we're involved in? How does this individual strength manifest as community strength? Well, we've already covered these answers, and it just goes back to those sources of strength and really being honest with ourselves on, are we bringing those sources of strength to the communities that we're involved in with all of this work that we've been doing to strengthen ourselves as individuals? So what are my goals? What is my purpose? Am I being honest to that? Am I working towards those things? Is the community I'm involved in aligned with those or not? Am I showing up consistently and persistent? Am I truly committed to what I'm involved in, to this community? And how do I contribute? If I am committed to this, how do I contribute? What role do I play? Am I a leader? Or am I a less obvious leader? And this is a practice. This isn't a thing that we do just now because we have this talk. This is a thing that we do, just like this middle point, consistently, persistently, and with commitment. Because we do evolve and we do change over time. So this can be a weekly thing, a monthly thing, a quarterly thing, but check in on these things. And always keep that practice of self-care and self-love running in the background as well. And if we do that, then the magic will happen. We are all connected. So as we focus on our individual selves, the last thing I'll say is don't lose sight of why you're focusing on the individual, why you're focusing on yourself. It's so you can bring yourself in all its strength to the communities and the purpose you care most about. And when you do that, you will strengthen others and you will strengthen the communities that you're involved with, because we are all connected like little flowers. And with that, I want to say thank you. Hopefully I wasn't too crazy over on time. Thank you for spending your time today. I hope this made sense to people. Hope this resonates with people. I can't say how much I am grateful for you spending your energy listening to this, and yeah, it's a real honor. So I would love to discuss.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank
That
you,
was
Tim.
great. So a little bit of background. Tim has actually been in Puerto Rico. You were here in 2012, was it, or 13? 2013?
I was there 3 years in a row. I think it was
Maybe it was 13, 14, 15.
13, 14,
yes,
15.
yes. So Tim has been to our community as part of the tech summit that used to happen here. Also talking about developer communities, and at the time you were working at SendGrid, right? I think.
Yeah,
right.
I was.
So I kind of just want to start this off by asking, and obviously we want to take all the questions from our audience as well, but I want to start by asking specifically about those developer communities at SendGrid. You brought so much to the table, and as you mentioned, SendGrid was really innovative at the time in really catering to developer communities in a way that no other tech company had done in the past. So how is that experience different from what we're seeing now, and how is that a trend that we can gain some insight from and learn from, right? It's very different to bring in developer communities as the center focus of your commercial strategy, right? Then basically have them be on the fringe. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, of course. So SendGrid and Twilio and kind of their emergence and their hitting their stride with this hyper focus on developers, that really took place, I think, in its golden era between 2010 and 2015, 16 or so. Just to give some context for folks. And there's a lot that we can learn from that. But there's also a lot that's so much different today that, if we were to, when I was taking notes in another part of my preparation for this, one thing that I pulled out was like, you can't copy paste, right? Like, because context is so important and because context shifts so dramatically, so quickly. That said, a lot of companies since Twilio and SendGrid gained the attention and, had all this massive success, a lot of people in the industry were just like, okay, let's do that. Let's copy paste that.
Yeah.
Right. And, what I've seen in those who have kind of emerged, those developer focused companies who have emerged as the next SendGrid or the next Twilio, they've taken bits and pieces from what they saw and observed in their strategies, especially in the fundamentals of like putting developers at the center of focus, but then how they do that is different, right? And I think it comes down to the specific goals of each company. For SendGrid and Twilio, it was a purely awareness play. We had the product built. We knew that it worked. We didn't need to find product market fit. It was just like, we know that we will grow if people know about us. So it was just all about getting out there. And the way we did that was traveling and hiring people everywhere. And just like, I visited 30 countries in 4 years and traveled millions and millions of miles on airplanes. And that's a really good example of how context shifts, and that won't work today, right? Like, that just wouldn't be possible in today's reality. So the companies that are adapting to that context shift and finding ways to continue to make developers feel very, very special. Like, that's the essence of it. Like, make them feel special, right? But also, like, it's important to, I think, recognize that developers are human beings, and they aren't just developers, right? There's a specialness of developers in that they've learned a language that most of us on this planet haven't learned that enables them to communicate with computers, which is really, really special. Most of us don't really know how to communicate with computers like developers do. So recognizing that core specialness of them and celebrating that, while also providing them opportunities to get the most out of that specialness. I think one thing that we didn't do so great back at SendGrid that I would do differently today is focus on diversity, right? Like, we always built just developer community. I think today's developer communities need to be more than just developers, so that developers can say, hey, I'm not just one of many other developers in this community. I'm one of few developers in this community. And therefore I'm very unique. And with other non-developer skills, I can combine with those and we can really create magic together. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. Is like, stay true to that, make them feel special, but evolve in that, like, how you make them feel special and the opportunities you present to them.
I love that. I love what you mentioned about diversity too. Obviously, context matters, and diversity is now, I guess, a more important, well, it's always been an important issue, but more people are paying attention to it than they were when you were in SendGrid, which is something to celebrate, right? So that's
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
good. Is there anybody else that has a question in the audience? I have another question, and this one is particular to our ecosystem here in Puerto Rico. So what would you say is the difference? I mean, you've been here on the island, and you know that even though our ecosystem our tech ecosystem specifically has changed throughout the years for the better and has grown, it is still very much of a nascent developer community vis-a-vis other places, right? I mean, you can't compare Puerto Rico to Silicon Valley or New York or other tech scenes. So what is the difference in the strategy that you use to nurture and develop a more nascent tech ecosystem and one that is much more developed? And how do you get people that are in your nascent ecosystem excited so more people want to join and come and make it stronger and continue that cycle that you're talking about of extraordinary value creation?
Yeah. I think that it's important when talking about nascency and like well-established to acknowledge the value and the uniqueness of that nascent stage, and not necessarily, let me see. By acknowledging that, you can key in on like, why does it exist in its nascent stage, and then lean into and invest in that part. And I think, in my observations, you probably have a better idea of this, but my observations, my experience in Puerto Rico, one of the things that has contributed to the progress that you had described is the pride that people feel for their country. I'm just going to call it a country, state, like its own thing. Right?
It's complicated.
It's its own thing. It's complicated. I know that wasn't the right term, but it's you know, more so than a state. I think like Puerto Rico is its own thing, and in the context of America, and there's a real pride in that, and a pride in the history. Even if the history isn't all happy history, like it's still the history. So, you know, I think that the way to kind of emerge from nascency into mainstream, if you will, is to invest in why it exists in the first place, you know, and I think that's what, and if community leaders in Puerto Rico are really leaning into that pride in ourselves, pride in our culture, and rallying around what the people of the island need and want the most, then the people of the island are going to get more involved in that community. And as people outside the island see what's happening, they're going to want to be involved from a distance if they can be, and come get involved in person if they can as well.
Yeah.
You know, when I say like, what's most important to the people of the island, you know, I know there's this intersection between like what we're doing for our living and making money and building our businesses, and then like just like life, right? And you know, Sophia, when you and I first talked about this talk, I said like, what about talking about climate change? You know, and we one reason why that came to mind is because as an island, like climate change is a big thing,
Yeah,
right?
very
Like
big
it's a
thing.
very important and pressing crisis. So, you know, maybe in the path of emerging from nascency to maturity, some of the activities that drive that could be adjacent to the central focus of a business in the community and bring people, you know, bring people together around that cause that might not have anything to do with this business's cause or product or technology, but the business can be, company can be a gathering point for this other cause, and you know, bring people together to work on something other than what's going to benefit your
Right.
corporation.
And I think that very much has happened here.
Knowing that if you do that, it will benefit your corporation.
Very much so in the developer community here with the Maria Tech Brigade, with the earthquakes, with now the pandemic, the tech community, even the tech community in the diaspora has really gotten involved in contributing, right, from afar. So maybe you can speak a little bit about the difference between building a local community, in this case of developers, right, and growing that, but also leveraging digital communities that can also support those physical communities.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important today is as important today as ever before, because the choice to be online instead of in person isn't so much a choice anymore. It's like a requirement. You know, what I've seen work best, even in the Puerto Rican example, and sorry if you hear my dog drinking water right now. It's, speaking of always being online. Where was I going with that? It distracted me and then I lost my train of thought. What I've seen work, even in the Puerto Rican example, but all over the world as I traveled, to leverage the internet and the digital channels for, you know, local growth through global participation. I think the most effective means of doing that is kind of like the local ambassador. You know, there's a community member there in Puerto Rico who lives in San Francisco, and I've his name is Ricardo, and I've interacted with him in both places, both on the island, but probably more so in San Francisco, and I always associate him with the Puerto Rican community. And the last time I got involved with the Puerto Rican community was through his outreach while he's in San Francisco, connecting me to someone who's in Miami who actually is from Puerto Rico, building a startup. So, you know, I know that a lot of people from the island are elsewhere right now. And so I would like really connect with the alumni, if you will. think about the alumni network who are off in other places and who you can connect with to kind of so each of them can be a bridge to their local communities and spread the word about what's happening in Puerto Rico to who they're interacting with locally, and kind of, you know, eventually maybe even kind of work towards like a sister city or sister community type model where you have these strong ties to particular communities and geographically, and support one another. You know, a good example of this is Ireland and the Native American community, particularly the Anishinaabe, who are in the upper Midwest of America. You know, it's just like they have this history since the original colonialism that the Irish people really took care of the Native Americans, and that's still playing out today, where like a Native team wasn't qualified to be part of the international World Cup for lacrosse, even though they invented the sport, because they weren't a sovereign nation. But Ireland, who is a sovereign nation, qualified for the tournament and said, hey, we want to give up our spot and give it to the Native American tribe because they deserve it. So yeah, it's like having these kind of allies, like geographic allies, kind of like a government might do. That's my answer.
Love it. Yes.
Hopefully that
Love it.
Karen, do you have any questions?
Just general comments. I loved the concept of the presentation with the existing emojis. And also, it's many of the things you said are so fundamental just to being a human being, and how that kind of connects to being, you know, we are human beings, we are individuals, even if we're leaders, not obvious leaders, developers, and how those fundamental things about, you know, self-care and mental and emotional things play out, and us giving back to a community and being part of a community, and just how everything's interconnected. I really liked it. And it's something I don't think many people kind of talk about, or we're not really aware how it plays out in this type of tech world nowadays.
Awesome.
Tim?
So it looks like we have a question from Avner. You want to get on stage, Avner?
The first one is, what breed is the dog? So Tim,
He said he's good in the chat.
he said what?
The breed of the dog, the dog is a mix between American Bulldog
Oh,
and
wow.
Pit Bull, and his name's Finn.
Nice.
And then the next question says, do you think the role of community development has to be intentional for all companies, and should it be encompassed under human resources?
Question.
Ooh, that is a good question. Does it have to be intentional? It doesn't have to be, but rarely will a community just kind of happen without some intention behind it. It happens, it does happen. I think that's probably how we discovered and put a word to community, is because it just happened one time, and then we're like, hey, how'd this happen? But it's very important to be intentional, because partly because of that other side of the technology of community that I mentioned. If we're not intentional about how we how we want this to play out, it might play out some other way that we don't want it to play out. So and from a company standpoint, if you believe in community and you want it to happen around your product, your brand, whatever, being intentional about it will bring efficiency and make the best use of your resources, and as opposed to kind of letting it happen as it may, which might be inefficient and might require you to course correct at some point and kind of backtrack. And then the second part of your question should be encompassed under human resources. I think a community team, a community effort strategy can exist and kind of come from any department within the company. What I've seen, especially in developer-focused companies, is that community teams are not situated in human resources. They're situated in either product and or engineering or marketing, or maybe support, actually, is the third. And that is typically determined based on what is the primary business value that the community is trying to drive. So in the case we talked about with SendGrid and Twilio, it was awareness, just like get people, get people to know about us. So our team was in the marketing department. If we, in a company that's focused on like, hey, we have the awareness, what we really want to do is build a community for support so that the community members can support one another, answer each other's questions, therefore relieving our support team of some of that burden, then your community team might be more logically located in the part of the organization where support is. So, and also with product and engineering, if you are very early, don't have product market fit, you really want to focus on the business value of getting feedback from developers in order to inform your product development, then your community team might be more situated in a product or engineering org. Typically I advise folks, unless you have like huge unlimited resources, to focus on one area of business value that you want your community to drive. But that can evolve over time, as the company evolves and the needs change. And I've also seen hybrid models used where, there's kind of like a community team that is somewhat not within any of the departments, but individual members of that team have different specializations and kind of embed themselves in different parts of the company. Like a really product focused developer relations person will be embedded in a product team, a particular product team about a particular product line within a product suite, and maybe work for a quarter or half a year kind of as an embedded part of that team, and obviously be a link out to the rest of the community team.
Well,
Awesome.
I think we're good with time. As the moderator, thank you so much for the opportunity. And Tim, it was a pleasure meeting you. We could talk for hours.
Thank you.
I can go into leadership versus community and ego thing, but we'll do that some other time for sure. I'm going to leave it to you, Karen.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to see you virtually. I hope that you can come back sometime soon when all of this is over. We'd love to receive you in our community as always. It was a real pleasure. I hope that everybody got some value out of it, because there was a lot of insight in your talk. So thank you again. Thank you everybody for attending our 5th Tech Guru Talk, and stay tuned for our last one of the year. Last one will be focused on cybersecurity. So we're very excited about that. And you can look it up at techgurutalks.com, all of the Piloto channels, and as well EverTech. Thank you again to Seriously Creative for being the awesome hosts and moderators that you are. And of course to our partners EverTech for making this happen. So Karen, if you want to just say some last words before we hand it off.
I want to echo what Anjimini and Sophia said. Definitely thank you, Tim. It was a pleasure meeting you. I know I got some value out of it. Hopefully the rest of the audience did as well. And a lot of things to think about now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thanks for creating space for what I think is a really important topic.
So I'm going to leave you by letting you know that there's a networking feature on this platform. So if you don't want to step out completely, you would like to go say hi to someone, you go to the networking section and you just hit the blue button, and it'll match you with someone else who's willing to have a quick chat. So that said, we're good for this 5th Tech Guru Talk. Thank you so much, Tim, Karen, and Sophia, and we're out.
Ciao.